What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Undiscovered Games video podcast, where we take a look at the lesser-known board games of the world and share those with you. I got a great old-school Wild West game for you today. This is called Way Out West, and it's from way back when. It's from the year 2000, so almost 25 years ago, and designed by the one and only Martin Wallace. Interestingly enough, this is one of the original worker placement board games. Now, you don't hear a lot about this in the discussion for worker placement games. A lot of people consider Caylus to be one of the original worker placements. It certainly was one of the first and remains in my top 10 games of all time. But I don't think Caylus was the first worker placement. A lot of people argue that Bus was the original worker placement from the year 1999. Now, of the games I've played, I would say Bus would be the original. But Way Out West only came 1 year later, and it definitely uses worker placement. So I find that fascinating. You know, a lot of people know the game Caylus, a lot of people know the game Bus, but right there in the mix is Way Out West as one of the grandfathers of worker placement, one of my favorite mechanisms. This game also uses some area control, some bidding for turn order, even some head-to-head conflict. It's a very interactive type of a game, and that's why I like it so much. Over the course of the game, players are going to be building up these different western towns out here, adding banks and stores and hotels and trains and all sorts of fun things to build up the town, and everything sort of works off of each other. For example, you can build a hotel and then you'll get paid for all the other players who have cowboys in that town staying at your hotel. You have some shared incentives on the board, ways to piggyback off your opponents, but ultimately you're just jockeying for the best positioning on the board for both the income rounds as well as the end game scoring. And you have to use your cowboys as your security guards. Your cowboys protect all your assets as you build them up. You only get 9 total cowboys, and you have to figure out how to best allocate them across the board. If you spread yourself too thin, you will become the target of gunfights, and that's where this game gets really fun, a little bit chaotic, definitely some punishing, brutal moments, but you really have to embrace that. You have to embrace the swinginess of those gunfights, and typically I do not like dice rolling for combat, especially in a more thinky type of a Euro game, but this game is an exception for me. I really like the balance this strikes between thinky, tough, Euro gamey type decisions, and then some chaotic dice rolling. It's just a weird mashup, but it works. I will say, when you first learn the game, it can be a little challenging to remember how all the stuff works together. Some of the icons aren't the best, but that's why I designed a player aid, which I just posted over on Board Game Geek. I'll post that link in the description below. It's free to download, and hopefully that helps some of you visualize how all these tiles work together, how they score, what kind of income they produce, and so on. So let's take a deeper look at Way Out West. I'm going to teach you how to play. I'll show you some examples of the gunfights, but before we get started, make sure you do click subscribe right here on YouTube at undiscovered_games to learn more about lesser known games just like this. Alright, let's learn how to play this. To set up the game, each player is going to choose a player color. There are 5 colors to choose from. We have red, yellow, blue, green, and orange. Give each player all their square tiles in their player color, as well as 2 black action discs and 1 colored disc to match their color. You're also going to give each player 1 farmer to start with. Now, the farmers are a neutral color. They don't belong to your player color, but just make sure each player starts with 1 farmer. Any leftover farmers go back in the box. Now, you need to organize all these tiles by type, and if you download my player sheet and print it on letter-size paper, the sizing should be accurate where you can store these tiles on that player sheet, and that can be like a storage thing for you. So we have our 4 building types here. We have the jail, the store, the hotel, and the bank. And then we have 2 different types of transport tiles. We have the stagecoach and the train. And then finally, we have our cattle and our cowboys. So each player should have 9 cattle and 9 cowboys, and then 3 each of all the buildings and transport tiles. And again, you always start with 1 farmer and 2 black action discs. Now, there should be another black action disc left over in the box. Place this over here on the round tracker. This is going to track the progress of the game up to round 12. The game will end after round 12. In a 3-player game, this starts on round 1. In a 4 and 5-player game, this starts on round 4. So you're actually only playing 9 rounds in a 4 and 5-player game. Now give everybody their starting money. In a 3 and 4 player game, everybody starts with $20. In a 5-player game, everybody gets $25. Make a supply of money next to the board and make a supply of these wanted posters next to the board. Finally, if you're playing with less than 5 players, you might want to block off these action spaces up here marked 5-player game only, because you don't want to accidentally place workers on these spots. So we just like to find something to cover these up with so we don't accidentally go there. Now the rulebook suggests everybody roll a d6 to determine a start player. I like to take all the player color discs here, mix them in my hand, and draw one at random, and that's going to be the start player. They go on space 1 of the turn order, and then we just fill these in going clockwise from the start player. This is only going to be the turn order for the setup phase of the game. After that, we're going to bid for turn order every round of the game. So each player in turn order here is going to go around the table placing 1 cowboy at a time until everybody has placed 3 cowboys to set up the game. There are no restrictions on where you can place these cowboys. They can go in any town on the board. You can double up or triple up. You can go where your opponents are. You can place these starting cowboys anywhere you want. The cowboys get placed in the box with the city name. There are unlimited spaces available for your cowboys. Now you'll notice above the city name we have these square boxes. This is where the buildings and the transport tiles get built. So anytime you build a train or a stagecoach or any of the 4 buildings, those are going to be limited to the number of squares in the town. Each square can only hold 1 tile. Finally, above that we see these fenced in areas. These are the corrals. These are where you will store your cattle tokens. So anytime cattle are out on the board, they must be in a corral. Also, when somebody plays a farmer tile, those also get placed inside the corral. Each square in the corral can only hold 1 tile. At the top of the board, you'll find all your worker placement spots. This is where you're going to place your little action discs to do these various actions. And again, we talked about the round tracker. You'll notice the round tracker is broken up every 3. That's because at the end of every 3rd round, we're going to do income. So in a 4 and 5 player game, the round thing starts on the 4. So we will be collecting income 3 times during the game, after round 6, after round 9, and after round 12 before we do final scoring. So in a 3-player game, there's actually 1 extra round of income after round 3, because remember, in a 3-player game, this starts on round 1. After we collect income after round 12, then we proceed to final scoring. We'll tally up all our victory points. The player with the most points will be the winner. It's important to note there are no victory points scored until the very end of the game. So we do those income rounds where we'll earn money, but your victory points only happen at the very end of the game. So the rounds are very simple. You start out by bidding for turn order. After you establish your turn order here on this track, then you go up here and you do your worker placement. So each player goes in turn order, placing 1 worker at a time and doing the action. At the end of the round, you move the round tracker up, you clear off all the action discs, give everybody back 2 discs to start the next round, and you do it all over again. If it's at the end of a 3rd round where there's a break here, you will do an income collection, which I'll go over here in a moment. So let's first talk about bidding for turn order. Now you always start with the start player from the previous round. They are the opening bidder, and then you bid going clockwise around the table from them. It's important to note you do not bid in the previous round's turn order. You just use the start player from the previous round and you bid clockwise. So let's say we're starting here with the yellow player, and let's say they want to bid, $1. Then you go clockwise, so red would have the chance to raise that bid or pass. Let's say red wants to pass. As soon as you pass, you go in the lowest possible turn order spot, which is the 4. So red is going to be going last. Then we go to the blue player. Let's say they want to stay in. They're going to raise yellow's bid, and they're going to bid $2. Then we go to green. Green says, I don't want to pay any more than $2, so I'm going to pass. Green is going to go 3rd. Then we go back to the yellow player. Yellow does not want to pay any more than blue's bid of 2. So now yellow is going to pass. Now when you pass, you have to pay all the money that you've already bid. So yellow loses this $1 to the bank, and they're going to go 2nd. Finally, blue loses their $2 to the bank, and blue gets to go 1st. So we're going blue, then yellow, then green, then red. So bidding for turn order, very, very simple in this game. You either raise the bid or you pass. As soon as you pass, you claim the lowest available turn order spot, and you must lose all money that you've already bid. After you establish your turn order, then you proceed to the meat of the game, which is the worker placement, or the action phase, as the game calls it. And real quick, I just want to reiterate, once we're done with the action phase, we're going to move this round tracker up to round 5. Blue will then start the bidding for turn order in round 5, and the bidding will go clockwise from blue. You just have to remember that next round, you only start with the start player from the previous round, and you always bid clockwise. All right, back to the action phase. So we've established our turn order. Now the players are going to take turns placing one action disc at a time up here on an available action space. Each action space can only hold one disc. As soon as you place a disc, you do the action, and then it goes to the next player in turn order. Each player will take 2 actions each round. If you can't do an action or you don't want to do an action, you just place your disc off to the side of the board and effectively pass your turn, which will lose you 1 action this round. So let's go over these worker placement areas. Over here we have all our building and transport tiles. So if you want to build a jail, you would place your disc here, pay $3 to the supply, and place your jail tile out. You can build that in any town with a couple restrictions. There must be an open square to build in that town. Each town can only hold one of each type of these buildings or transports, no matter who they belong to. So if the red player already had the jail built in Abilene, I cannot come in and build a jail in Abilene. I would have to put my jail somewhere else. The other restriction is each player is limited to building 2 of these per town. So for example, if I already have the train and the store built here in Kansas City, and let's say I want to build a jail. I place my worker up here on the jail. I pay my $3. I cannot build a jail in Kansas City because I already have 2 things built there. It's important to note that cattle and cowboys have no effect on this. It's just the building and transport tiles. You're limited to building a maximum of 2. Now there is a way to get more than 2 buildings in a single town, but you can only do that by taking over your opponent's buildings that they already built, and you do that through gunfights, which I'll talk about later. So just know that when you go to build one of these things, you place your worker disc here. Again, if there's already a disc on one of these spots, you cannot go there, and you must pay the cost showing. So the train, for example, costs $20. And I'll go over why you want to build these things later in the video, but just know these all work the same in this block of squares here, and you can build this stuff anywhere on the board as long as you follow those rules I just talked about. Over in this section, this is how you place new cowboys and new cattle on the board. Let's say I place my worker disc here. This says I can pay $1 for 1 new cowboy, or I can do it twice. I can pay $2 for 2 new cowboys. So let's say I pay my $2 to the supply. I can take 2 of my cowboys and place them in any town I want on the map. I can separate them, 2 different towns, or I can place them both in the same town. Again, the cowboys go in the box with the town name, and there's no limit to how many cowboys can be in a town. Now let's say I want to do this action instead. This works very similar to buying new cowboys, except this is buying new cattle. Now this has a few more restrictions. I can either buy 1 new cattle for $1, or I can do it twice. I can pay $2 to get 2 new cattle. But when you place new cattle on the board, they have to go into a town where you have at least 1 cowboy already. The other restriction for placing new cattle is you have to look at the number on each town. So notice how these towns are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Think of the cattle as starting at the bottom of the board and slowly working their way up. As soon as a corral inside of a town becomes more than half full, then it sort of unlocks the next town up. So for example, let's say the board looked like this. The red player has 2 cattle here in San Antonio. Let's say I choose the place cattle action. So I put my disc here. I pay $2 to the bank to place 2 new cattle. So my very first cattle has to go in San Antonio because it's not more than half full yet. So I could not place this cattle anywhere else except San Antonio. And again, I have to have a cowboy here. So if I didn't have a cowboy here, I could not even choose the place cattle action right now. But because I have a cowboy here, I can choose this action. My first cattle has to go here in San Antonio because it's half full or less. Now that this is more than half full, this sort of unlocks the next town, which is Kansas City. So my second cattle that I place, I could either stay here in San Antonio and get, fill this out, or since this is more than half full, I could place this cattle here in Kansas City and start filling this one up. But again, I would have to have a cowboy in Kansas City as well, which I do. You just have to think of them as unlocking the next town up. As soon as it becomes more than half full, then the next town becomes available. But you can always place cattle in a lower numbered town as long as there are spaces available. And what's interesting is later in the game, you can lose some of your cattle to gunfights, or you can move them, which is another one of the action spaces. I'll talk about that in a moment, but I want to show you how that would work. So let's say it's later in the game and we had already unlocked San Antonio, Kansas City, and Abilene, but a player chose to move a cattle out of Kansas City. So now all of a sudden, Kansas City is back to being half full or less again. So let's say I choose the place cattle action. I pay my $2, I place my 2 cattle. Where does my first cattle have to go? Well, again, you look where you have Cowboys, and then you have to look to see if there's a lower numbered town that's still half full or less. So in this example, I have Cowboys here in Abilene, I have Cowboys in San Antonio, I have Cowboys in Kansas City, and I have Cowboys up here in Dodge City. Well, I cannot go to Dodge City because that hasn't been unlocked yet, but I cannot go to Abilene either because there's a lower number that's half full or less. So this first cattle would have to go either to Kansas City to fill that back up, or I could go lower than that to San Antonio. Hopefully this example is helping you visualize this. When we play the game, we don't even really think about this anymore. It just kind of comes naturally after you play the game and you see it. You're just always kind of looking at the board bottom to top. Every time you want to place cattle, you look where you have Cowboys, but then you just have to make sure there's not a lower numbered town that's still, empty or half full or less. And I put that on the player aid to remind you. Now we're going to move over to this last section of worker placement, and these are all free to take. So up here we see a 4, a 3, and a 2 with the Cowboys. This just says if I go here, I can move any 4 of my Cowboys to any other place I want on the board. There are no restrictions where you move your Cowboys. Now obviously you cannot move other players' Cowboys, but as long as you move your own Cowboys, you can disperse them to other towns however you wish. The Stagecoach is there to remind you that the player who owns the Stagecoach gets paid. I'm going to go over that in the next segment of the video, so don't worry about that right now. It just means that if I go here, I can move up to 4 of my Cowboys. The next player to choose this action could go here and move up to 3 of their Cowboys, and so on. So 4, 3, or 2. Then down here, this is how you move cattle. If you select this action, you can move 1 and only 1 of your cattle tokens. The nice thing is there are no restrictions on this movement. So I could take my cattle from here and move it all the way up here. I don't have to have a Cowboy there. I don't have to worry about the town being half full or less, and so on. So you can move 1 of your cattle tokens anywhere on the board as long as there's an open corral to put it in. This action here is how you place your one and only farmer out onto the board. So you just place your disc here and place a farmer. The farmer must be placed in a corral, so in the same squares where the cattle are placed, and each town can only have 1 farmer. So if a town already has a farmer there, I cannot choose to place a second farmer in that same town. And you can either place the farmer in an empty square, or you can replace 1 cattle token that's already there. So for example, if my opponent had 3 cattle here in San Antonio, and I place my worker disc here to choose this action, I take my one and only farmer, and I could either place it in this empty square, or I could replace one of my opponent's cattle. So let's say I put it here, and then I give this cattle back to my opponent to use later. And I will also explain here in a moment why you want to put a farmer out, why you want to do any of this stuff. I'm just trying to go over what these action spaces do right now. We have one more action space to talk about, and that is the all-important gunfights, and that's this space here. All of these spaces work the same. You just pick one that's available and start a fight with somebody. You pick an opponent, choose your target, and go to town. And I'll get into that in a moment as well. So that's all the available action spaces. Now let's get into why you want to build all this stuff or do all these actions. This is more the strategy of the game, and this is the hardest thing to teach to new players, and that's what motivated me to design this player aid, because it really kind of helps remind you why you want to do all this stuff and how everything works together. So I'm going to use this player sheet to kind of help teach this next part of the game, and then at the end of this, I'll go over gunfights. Now, one reason you want to build this stuff is for income. I put everything that generates income over on the right side of the player sheet, and it's in green, so you can easily glance out and see which things give you income. For example, if you have cattle on the board, every cattle is going to give you $2 per your cattle. That's only when we do income. Remember, income is every third round where there's a break in this round track. Now, it says here, 2 times if a train. That means if any player has built the train in that town, it's going to double the income of all the cattle there. So even if another player owns the train, my cattle there are going to be double that, so $4 each. Likewise, if there's a farmer in that town, it's going to cut the income in half for all the cattle. So if there was a farmer in this town, all these cows are only going to give you $1 of income. So if a farmer and a train are there, they cancel each other out. One doubles, one cuts in half, then you're back to $2 per cow. And that's the main reason you want to get a lot of cattle out on the board, because they're going to generate you a lot of income. Especially if you can get a lot of your cattle in one town and then build the train, that's going to give you a ton of income. Just remember, the train gives double to all players' cattle in that town. Cattle will also contribute to step 3 in the end game scoring. I kind of made it where you can just glance out and try to look for this cattle symbol. Everywhere you see the cattle symbol, that's where that matters. Okay, so that's just kind of how I try to organize this using the symbols, but I'll get into the scoring later. The hotel here, again, costs $7 if you build a hotel, and the hotel is going to generate you $1 of income per opponent's cowboy in that town when we do income. So in this example, let's say I have 3 cowboys here, yellow has 2 cowboys, and red has 2 cowboys. Well, we don't count my cowboys, we just look at opponent's cowboys. There are 4 opponent cowboys, that is $4 of income to me. So if you see a lot of opposing cowboys in a town building up, that might be a good place to go in and stick a hotel. And it's also going to count toward end game scoring. Again, I'll get into that later. Next, we're going to look at the store. Again, it's $5 to build a store, and the store is going to give you income $1 per opponent's cattle. So this is a way to piggyback off of other people's cattle. Let's say you see all the other players have their cattle somewhere and you don't have any. Well, I'll stick a store in there and then I can at least get $1 for all of their cattle. And it also gives you $2 if there's a farmer in that town. So you could think of the store as kind of a hedge against somebody sticking a farmer in, trying to cut down on your cattle income. Well, if you own the store, you're going to get paid for other players' cattle and you'll get paid $2 if there's a farmer. So you can kind of recoup some of your lost income if they do play that farmer. I love all the checks and balances in this game. It just takes a minute to wrap your head around how everything sort of bounces off of each other. And again, hopefully this player sheet will help you visualize some of that. I definitely think this game takes a learning game to really wrap your head around it though. Now let's move on to the bank. The bank costs $10 to build, and this is going to give you $2 of income per opponent's building and transport tiles within that town. In this example, let's say I own the bank and I own the store, but my opponent, yellow, built the train and red built the jail. Well, the bank is only going to give me $4 of income. Remember, it's $2 per opponent's building and transport tiles. You do not count cattle or cowboys when you're figuring the bank income. The bank also comes into play when we do the gunfights, so I'll get into that later, and the bank will count toward endgame scoring, also discussed later. So those are all the things that give you income: cattle, hotels, stores, and banks. And don't forget, the train and the farmer will modify some of those income levels. Now, looking at the left side of the sheet here, we already discussed trains and farmers. The jail really only matters in gunfights, so I'll get into that next. And really, the cowboys only matter in gunfights as well. However, the cowboys are required to be able to place new cattle. So looking over here, that leaves us with the stagecoach. Why do you want to build a stagecoach? Well, for one, they're only $3, so it's a steal. Also, more importantly, it's going to pay you instant money anytime your opponents do one of 3 things with their cowboys. So that's outlined here on the player aid. So the first bullet point says an opponent places a new cowboy into this town. So if I own the stagecoach here in Abilene, and the yellow player chooses the place cowboy action here, they place a new cowboy into Abilene, I get $1, and it's $1 per new cowboy they place. So if they pay $2 to place 2 cowboys here, I will get $2 from the supply, because I own the stagecoach. Now, if yellow owns the stagecoach and they place their own cowboys in, they will not get paid. You never make money off your stagecoach for your own cowboys. It's only off of your opponent's cowboys. The second bullet point says an opponent moves cowboys out of this town. So in this example, I, the blue player, have the stagecoach here in Abilene, and yellow has 3 cowboys here. They go up here and they choose the move cowboys action. They're going to move all 3 of their yellow cowboys out to other towns. It does not matter where they move them to. We look at where they're moving them from. Who owns the stagecoach where they're moving them from? I do. So I get $1 per cowboy that they move out. Now, this rule gets a little wonky when you are the same player that owns the stagecoach and you're moving your cowboys out of a town. Then you would look at the arrival town instead, because you cannot make money from your own stagecoach. So I'll show you another example. Let's say Yellow has the stagecoach here in Abilene, and Yellow wants to move their 3 yellow cowboys out to other towns. So they select the Move Cowboys action, they take all 3 of their cowboys, and they can move them anywhere. Now, since Yellow owns the stagecoach where Yellow is moving from, now you have to look at who owns the stagecoaches where those cowboys arrive. So they might move 1 cowboy up here to Kansas City. That stagecoach is owned by the green player, and they're going to get $1 for that new cowboy. Let's say they move their other 2 cowboys down here to San Antonio. Well, I, the blue player, have the stagecoach here in San Antonio, so I would get $2 for those new cowboys. Again, that only happens when the place that the cowboys are moving from has no valid stagecoach. That's what I'm saying here in this 3rd bullet point. So that could be no stagecoach at all, or the same player that's moving the cowboys also owns the stagecoach. It's kind of a weird, wonky rule to teach to new players, but once you play the game, you really hardly even think about it. It just kind of makes sense. It is worth noting, stagecoaches are not required to move cowboys. It's just whenever cowboys get placed or moved, you have to check to see if anybody has any stagecoaches that pay out. And you just have to kind of do that order that I talked about. You check the departing town first. If there's no stagecoach there that can pay, then you do the arrival town, and you never make money off your own cowboys. All right, let's get into the gunfights. This is a little bit difficult to teach, but when you see it in action, it's really not that hard. And again, once you play the game a couple times, it just comes very naturally. So if you want to start a gunfight, you place your worker disc on an available gunfight action up here, and you are considered the attacker. Then you have to pick a target to be the defender. Now, most of the time, the target is going to be an opponent. So you choose an opponent and one of their assets, as I call them. So you can target an opponent's building or transport tile, or you can target an opponent's cattle. If you don't target an opponent, you could instead target a neutral farmer that's out there. So if you just wanted to get rid of one of those farmers, you could say, I'm going to start a gunfight and go after this farmer. Now, there's a few things to consider when you're starting a gunfight, but first you have to make sure you have at least 1 level of attack strength in the town that you're starting the fight. So you cannot start a gunfight if you have 0 attack strength. Let's talk about how to calculate your attack strength. First, you look at your cowboys. Each cowboy is 1 attack strength. So if I had 3 cowboys here, I have 3 attack. Now, there is one building that offers you an additional level of attack, and that is the jail. What I like to do when we build the jail is I like to place a cube just from another game or something on that jail to remind everybody that the owner of that jail also has what I call a virtual cowboy in that town. So even if I had no cowboys in this town, I still have 1 cowboy because I have the jail. So the jail kind of comes equipped with 1 virtual cowboy that's always there. And as you can see on the player sheet, that cowboy can be used as attack or defense. So if you had the jail in town but no other cowboys, you could legally start a gunfight there because you technically have 1 cowboy of attack strength if you own the jail. Now, if you don't own the jail and you have no cowboys there, now you have 0 attack strength, so you cannot start a gunfight in that town. You have to either have the jail, at least 1 cowboy, or some combination of jail plus cowboys to be able to start a fight in a town. After you start the fight, then you have to pick 1 target, and that target has to determine their defense strength. After they determine their defense, then whoever has the lower attack or defense gets to shoot first. Your strength is just how many dice you get to start with when you roll. So if I start a fight and I have 3 attack strength and my opponent has 5 defense strength, I have the lower of those numbers, which means I get to shoot first. I get to roll first. Since my attack strength is 3, I would get to roll 3 dice. I'll explain more about the dice here in a moment, I promise. I'm just trying to give you an overview here. again, this is very hard to teach, easier to see, but I have to kind of go over it before I show you the examples. So let's talk about how to determine defense strength. So after you pick a target, the target has to figure out their defense. The defender counts all of their cowboys in that same town that you're fighting in. Each cowboy is worth 1 defense strength. Then you're also going to get to add defense strength depending on the target. So let's say I attack my opponent's store. The store, as you can see here on the player sheet, has no built-in attack or defense. So in that case, they would only get to count their cowboys as defense strength. So if I was targeting their store and they had 2 cowboys in town, their defense strength is 2. However, if I target their bank, you'll see here the bank has +1 defense if targeted. So if I target their bank, they just add 1 to their defense total. So if they had 2 cowboys there and I target their bank, they would have a defense of 3, 2 for their cowboys and 1 for the built-in defense of the bank. Again, that defense only kicks in if you target the bank. Think of it as a security guard that's permanently stationed and will only defend the bank. The train works exactly the same way. If I target my opponent's train, they add all their cowboys +1 for the train. The train has a permanent defense built into it if it's targeted. Now, the jail works a little differently. The jail has a permanent defense for the entire town. Think of it like the sheriff roams around the town and defends all the gunfights. So let's say I wanted to target my opponent's store. They own the jail and the store. They have 2 cowboys in town. Their defense strength is 3. They count both of their cowboys plus their defense from their jail. So the jail is the only building in the game that gives you attack and defense anywhere you fight in the town. Again, think of it like the sheriff roaming around the town and getting involved in all the scuffles. Furthermore, if you own the jail, you can get involved in other players' gunfights if you want to. You can only defend for other players, but the defender of a separate gunfight, as long as it's in your town, can ask you, the jail owner, to help them defend. You just give them 1 extra defense strength. Now, you can decide if you want to help them or not. It just kind of depends on the state of the board, how it's going to affect your income and the scoring and whatnot. Sometimes you want to help your opponents, sometimes you don't. We even play the game where you can bribe the owner of the jail to help you defend, offer them some money and things. So you can really have fun with this thematically, but I'm just trying to help you understand how to calculate attack strength and defense strength. That's the most important thing, because that's how many dice you're going to get to roll. Now, one last thing is what happens if I attack my opponent's building and they have 0 defense. Let's say they have no cowboys there and I'm attacking their hotel. They don't own the jail, so they don't get a defense from that. How do they defend themselves? Well, they always get 1 defense by default. So if you don't get any help from anywhere else, like the jail or the inherent defense of a certain building or your cowboys, you don't have any cowboys there, if you calculate your defense strength and it's still 0, then you still get 1 defense strength by default. You just don't get to add that default strength to any other defense that you have. So just think of it as the defender is always going to get to roll at least once in a gunfight. All right, now let's talk about the actual fight. How does it play out? After you calculate attack strength and defense strength, whichever number is lower, they shoot first. Let me show you some examples here so you can see how this plays out. Let's say I am here in Abilene. I have 5 cowboys and I want to try to take over my opponent's hotel. So I'm going to start a gunfight. I am the attacker. My attack strength is 5. My opponent owns the hotel. Their defense strength is 3. They have 2 here for their cowboys, and they own the jail in town. The jail provides 1 extra defense for all of their stuff in the town. So right now it's 5 attack and 3 defense. 3 is the lower number, which means the defender gets to shoot first. Their defense strength is 3, so they roll 3 dice. Here we go. They're going to roll their dice. First, they roll a 1. Next, they roll a 5. Anytime you roll a 5 or a 6, that kills 1 opponent's cowboy. So my opponent rolled a 5. I lose 1 cowboy right away. Now they roll a 6. I lose another cowboy right away. So now my attack strength is cut down to 3, which means now I only get to roll 3 dice on my turn. So even though I started with an attack strength of 5 and my defender had 3, they already knocked out 2 of my cowboys. So now when it's my turn to shoot, I only get to roll as many as I have strength at that moment. So now I roll 3 dice. I roll a 1, I roll a 2, and I roll a 6. So the 6 kills one of my opponent's cowboys. You have to kill the tiles first. So the tiles always come off the board, the cowboy tiles, before you kill off like the sheriff or like the inherent defense of the bank. You always get rid of these tiles first. So now my opponent is down to his strength of 2. Now it goes to their turn. They roll 2 dice. They roll a 5. There goes another one of my cowboys. They roll a 1. Then it goes back to me. Now I only get to roll 2. I roll a 1 and I roll a 3. Nothing happens. Then it goes to my opponent. They have to roll 2 again. So you just keep going back and forth until one player runs out of strength, at which point the gunfight ends immediately. So if the red player rolls, let's say they roll a 6, there goes my cowboy, and then they roll a 5. There goes my last cowboy. That is the end of the gunfight. I don't get to roll anymore. They successfully defended their hotel. So whenever the defender wins a gunfight, that's pretty much just the end of it. You move on with the game. But if the attacker wins the gunfight, they're going to get to replace whatever they took over with their own thing. So like if I was targeting that hotel, and let's say I won the gunfight. So let's rewind here. I had 2 strength left. They had 2 strength left, and they rolled a 1 and they rolled a 3. So nothing happens to me. Then it goes to me. I have 2 dice to roll. I roll a 6. There goes their last cowboy tile, but they still have 1 cowboy here from the jail. And I roll a 5. There goes their cowboy from the jail. So I don't defeat their jail because the jail was not the target. They just lost their cowboy as defense, basically. So now I win the gunfight and I take over their hotel. So my hotel goes in, their hotel goes out. Now, whenever you target a hotel, a store, a stagecoach, or a train, and you win that gunfight as the attacker, you get to replace it with your own of that type. However, if you target the jail and you defeat it in an attack, the jail gets removed from the board and you do not replace it with your own jail. If you target the bank in a gunfight, and let's say you win that as the attacker, then you just rob the bank. You don't replace the bank. And here's how to rob the bank. After you win the gunfight, where you targeted the bank, you roll 3 dice. Whatever the total is, you steal that much money from the owner of the bank. As long as they have enough money, you just take it from them and their bank stays. If they don't have enough money to pay you, then you take all that they have and remove the bank from the board. But you still do not replace it with your own bank. And one last thing, after you rob the bank, then you have to check to see who owns the jail. If another player owns the jail in town, you have to flee all of your cowboys to other towns on the board. If there's no jail there, you don't have to do that. Or if you, the robber, own the jail as well, then you don't have to do that. But if another player owns the jail, you have to take all of your remaining cowboys from that town and disperse them one at a time, town by town across the board. So only 1 cowboy per town. And no stagecoach payouts are given when you have to disperse your cowboys like that. So you just have to remember, the jail and the bank never get replaced in a gunfight. The other tiles that you target do get replaced if you win the gunfight. Let's talk about targeting cattle. If I want to target my opponent's cattle in town, I can target 1 or 2 cattle. It just has to be of the same opponent and within the same town. So normally you would just always target 2 cattle unless they only had 1. And the way that works is exactly the same. You just start a fight. Their defense strength is just all their cowboys in town. Plus, if they have the jail or if somebody else has the jail and they want to help defend, that's how you calculate their defense strength. If you win that gunfight, you just replace their cattle with your cattle. Same way. And once again, if they have no cowboys in town and no other defense, they still get 1 defense strength as a default. So they're still going to roll 1 die in defense of their cattle. But if you target 2 cattle, that counts as 1 target. So they only get 1 die of defense. Now, let's say there's a farmer in town and you want to start a gunfight to try to remove that pesky farmer. So the farmer, again, does not belong to any player. So they just defend as 1 level of defense. So I start a gunfight. I come down here. I say I'm targeting the farmer. Well, they just have a defense strength of 1. So they'll roll 1 die in defense. Now, if another player owns the jail, that player can choose to add 1 extra defense to the farmer. So if I'm the blue player and I'm saying I'm going to attack this farmer here, I have a strength of 3 with my cowboys. But the yellow player owns the jail. the yellow player says, you know what, I'm going to add my sheriff here to this farmer. So now the farmer has a defense strength of 2. So the farmer would shoot first, rolling 2 dice. Again, every time a 5 or a 6 is rolled, one of my cowboys has to die. Then when it's my turn to roll, I only get as many dice as I have cowboys when I start my roll. If the farmer wins, then the farmer stays. If the attacker wins, then the farmer gets removed from the game. It's also worth noting that in that scenario where the other player helps defend the farmer is the last one to die in that battle. A couple more quick notes about gunfights. You can always retreat from a gunfight before you roll. So you could even do this in the middle of a battle. Like if you roll all your dice, your opponent rolls all their dice, then it's back to you to roll again. You could just be like, I'm not going to roll, I'm going to retreat. So anytime it's your turn to roll in a gunfight, you could instead retreat and forfeit the battle. So if the defender forfeits the battle, then the attacker wins, and the attacker just does what they would normally do if they win a battle, like replace the building or rob the bank, etc., etc. But if the attacker retreats, then the defender wins the battle and nothing happens as usual. So if you retreat, the only rule is you must move all of your remaining cowboys out of town, and you just flee anywhere else you want to flee. You can group your cowboys or you can spread them out however you want to do that. And again, just like the bank robbery, there are no payouts for the stagecoaches when you're fleeing cowboys. And real quick, before I forget, whoever wins the gunfight, whether it's the attacker or the defender, the winner always takes a wanted poster and just keeps that in front of them. This supply of wanted posters is limited, and in the rare case that it runs out, if you need to take another wanted poster, you can steal one from an opponent who has a wanted poster. The wanted posters are just going to be a majority scoring at the end of the game, which I'll get to in a moment. But just don't forget, every time there's a gunfight, whoever wins that fight takes a wanted poster. Even if you fight a neutral farmer, if you win that, you get a wanted poster. What I like to do is whenever we start a gunfight, I like to place the poster out on the action space with my disc, just so when we clean up for the round, we make sure that we did actually give the winner the wanted poster. Okay, we're almost done with the pesky gunfight rules. What happens if the attack strength and the defense strength are the same? Who shoots first? Neither player shoots first. It's simultaneous combat. This works a little bit differently because you don't take your losses right away. You kind of think of this as you're both firing at the same time. Let me show you a quick example. Let's say, I'm attacking my opponent's store here. They have a strength of 3. I have a strength of 3. Okay. I am going to roll 3 dice. Let's say I roll a 1, a 5, and a 6. Now, before they lose their cowboys, they get to roll their 3 dice. So they roll a 1, and a 5. So I knock out 2 of their cowboys. They knock out 1 of my cowboys. And then we go again, except for this roll, I start with 2 dice and they start with 1, but it's still considered simultaneous. So I roll the 2 dice, I get a 5 and a 2. That means I knocked out one of their cowboys, but they still get to roll. They don't take that loss right away. So they roll their 1 die, they roll a 6. So they knock out one of mine, I knock out one of theirs, but now they have no cowboys left, so I win. Now let's say it just happened to go down to the very last roll and we both lost our final cowboy on that last roll. In that case, the defender wins by default. So if it is a draw in simultaneous combat, the defender automatically wins. A couple minor little rules and then we'll be done with gunfights. When you attack somebody else's building and you replace it with one of yours, you are no longer limited to 2 buildings in that town. It's just when you select the action up here to build a new building or transport, if you already have 2 or more in that town, you cannot select that action. But you can still take over other players' stuff and go over your maximum of 2. The other little rule to remember is if you don't have any more of a certain type of building or something, you are still allowed to target that. You just don't replace it with anything. So like if you already have all your stores built, and you still want to attack an opponent's store in a gunfight, you still do that. Their store just gets removed if you win. You just don't have another store to replace it with. Now, anytime a building gets moved off the board or a cowboy gets killed in a gunfight, the rulebook says to return those things to their owner. However, if you defeat a farmer, the farmer gets removed from the game completely. Now, we like to play a little house rule, and I'll talk about that in my review section later in the video, but we like to play where, if you you lose your cowboy in the gunfight, he's gone because he died in the gunfight. It just makes more sense thematically, but it's a much more punishing game when you play like that. So more on that later in the review. And those are all the rules for the gunfights. I know it seems like a lot, but I promise you it's really not. When you play the game, it's not that difficult to understand this. It's just I'm finding that it's very difficult to teach. I haven't had to teach this game in a while. We've had this for so many years and it's just second nature to us. But now that I'm trying to teach it to all of you, I'm finding out that it is a difficult game to teach. So hopefully you're still with me here. Let's talk about end game scoring. So after round 12, you collect income like usual, and then you proceed to the end game scoring. Now I have this summarized here on the player sheet as well. The first thing you have to do is you have to figure out the town size. Each town size is going to be how many buildings and transport tiles are there. Not cowboys, not cattle, just any of the buildings or the trains or the stagecoaches. Then each one of those is worth the town size in victory points. So if there were 5 things in the town, each one of those things scores its owner 5 points. In this example here, there is a yellow train, there's a blue hotel, there's a blue store, and there's a red jail. The town size here would be 4 because there are 4 of these things. Each of these tiles is worth 4 points. So yellow gets 4 points, blue gets 8 points, and red gets 4 points. And you do that town by town by town. Then you look for cattle. Every cattle on the board is worth 1 point each. But if there's a train in that town, it's going to make each cattle in that town worth 2 points. Again, it does not matter who built the train. All the cattle in the town where the train is going to get an extra point. So in this example here, yellow is going to get 6 points for their cows. Blue is going to get 4 points for their cows because each one is worth 1 point, but there's a train built. Now, if there's a farmer in the town, you minus 1 victory point per cattle in that town. So in this example, there's a farmer here. These cows score nothing. And once again, just like income, the farmer and the train in the same town will cancel each other out. So if there's a farmer and a train, then each cow is worth 1 point again. Now you go to step 3. This is just bonus points to whoever controls each town. So the way you determine who controls a town, you add up all your buildings and transport tiles plus your cattle. You do not count cowboys. You just add cattle plus all these other things. Whoever has the most of those tiles in a town scores points equal to the town size. So let's show you an example of this. This town size is 4 because there are 4 building and transport tiles here. Blue player has 3 cattle and 2 of these buildings. The red player has 2 buildings but only 1 cattle. So their strength is 3. Blue's strength is 5. Blue has control of the town. So blue gets 4 victory points. Again, because the town size is 4. And you do that for each town. Now, if there's a tie when you're determining who controls the town, then you don't give these bonus points to that town. Next, we move on to the player with the most wanted posters. That player is going to score 4 points. If there's a tie for most wanted posters, each tied player scores 2 points instead. Finally, the player with the most money gets 5 points. If there's a tie for most money, each tied player gets 2 points. And that's all the ways to score points. Add up all your points. The player with the most points wins. If there's a tie for most points, you share the victory. And that is how you play Way Out West. I tried to cover every single rule in this video. If I miss anything, I will put it in the description below. So make sure you always check the description below under rules clarifications just to clarify anything that I might have missed or mistakes that I might have made. I try to keep these tutorials as clean as possible. I feel like this game desperately needed some video content because this is one of our go-to games. This sees our table year after year after year. We love it. It's not that it's the perfect game. I mean, there's some little flaws to the design, but that's part of the charm. You know, it's an old school game. It's not going to be perfect, but I don't need it to be perfect for what it is. I just think it's fun. You go out, you build up these towns, you try to protect your stuff with your cowboys, and you get in gunfights with each other. I mean, what's not to love? Yeah, you can argue that, you know, the bank costs too much. You don't get a a good return on your investment for building the bank, or the train might cost too much. But I've seen players build the bank, I've seen players build the train, and it works out for them. Other times it doesn't work out for them. You just have to embrace the game for what it is. It's charming, it's old school, it's everything I love about these games that just are sitting out there waiting to be discovered, and that's what this YouTube channel here is all about. So Way Out West, that's a 9 out of 10 for me. This has been in my collection for 7 years. We play it all the time. Highly recommend this game. Definitely give it a few plays for everything to sink in. You really have to, figure out how everything works together. And I think you'll start to see what I see in this game the more you play it. Now, obviously, the icons are not the best. We have trouble seeing which one is the store, which one is the hotel, at a glance. But you start to look closer and you start to recognize that stuff as you play the game more. But obviously, it's not the best graphic design. It's not the best looking board or anything like that. But the gameplay is solid, and that's what matters the most. The flow is very smooth as well. Once you figure all this stuff out, the game just zips around the table. Each player is only taking 2 actions each round, and nowadays when we play this, it's an hour long tops. Your first couple games might be a little longer, trying to figure everything out, but as you become familiar with the game, it just gets better and better. It gets faster to play, and it's just an all-around unique game. I don't know that it feels like any other game I've ever played. I think if you like games like Tigris and Euphrates, you might like this one because it's like that Euro game with some direct conflict, although this one is even a little more random when you're rolling the dice, but it's still that type of crowd I think might like this game. Or if you just like Wild West themes, definitely check this one out if you've never played it. I love the thinky decisions combined with the fact that you can just be absolutely destroyed in a gunfight. Yet, the gunfights, you have to play the odds. You know how many dice you're going to get, you know how many dice your opponent is going to get. You can choose to play a little risky if you want, or you can, shore up with your Cowboys and just really play it safe. I just love all the different maneuvering around the board, how everything works off of each other. There's a nice check and balance system there between all the different things you can do, and it's just a neat little game. Now, I will say, we like to play a little house rule that is absolutely punishing, and I don't know if I'd recommend it for your first game, but you might want to give it a try, and that is whenever anything leaves the board in this game, remove it from the game. So Cowboys killed in gunfights, those are gone from the game for good. The rulebook says to give them back to their owners, which implies that they can place them again later. But thematically, we like to think, well, your Cowboys got killed in the gunfight, they're out of the game forever. And the same thing goes for the buildings. If somebody replaces your store, you don't get your store back, that store's gone. So that changes the game quite a bit because you really have to weigh when you're going to go in and strike somebody. It kind of cuts down a little bit on the amount of gunfights, knowing that you're not going to get them back if you lose them. It also makes you rethink, if you want to retreat a gunfight and stuff. I think it really adds to the tension that should be in a game like a Wild West themed game. You really feel that looming tension building. It's like a standoff type tension. Things are getting built up. Everything seems calm, but stuff's about to hit the fan at any minute. And I love the thematic flavors in this game and how it comes through in more of the vibe that it gives you. It's not so much the game itself that feels thematic, but just how you feel when you're playing it. You feel like you're in a Western. So another thing I love about the game is it works well at all player counts. I will happily play this game at 3, 4, or 5 players, and I'll enjoy it just as much no matter how many people are playing. When I first played at 3 players, I did not think I was going to like the game as much. I was thinking, there's not going to be as much player interaction, blah, blah, blah. But we had a ton of gunfights still. You have an extra 3 rounds with 3 players, so you get to build up your stuff a little more. The bank becomes a little more valuable to build early on in a 3-player game. So, there's some little differences from 3 to 4 to 5 players, but I like the game equally at all those player counts. 5 players, you open up a couple extra spaces up here, so it's not too crowded, but as open as the worker placement area feels at first, you'd be surprised. Like, the more you play the game and get better at it, the tighter that becomes because you can kind of guess where other players are going to want to go, which makes the bidding for turn order very important. So if that player wants to come in and put a farmer in, you cannot let them have first player this round. So you might want to bid high on turn order, or maybe you want to manipulate turn order so you can go last. That's another thing I forgot to mention. Sometimes it's good to go last in this game, because if you can stick a farmer in, especially right before the very end of the game, you can just kind of see how the board develops and then throw a farmer in. You can manipulate the turn order so that you can go last in a round. But that requires you to bid high in the round before that, so you have the first choice to drop out in the next round. It's one of those games where the more you play it, the more subtleties start to show up, and it's a game I just never get tired of, diving into and exploring. It's just a lot of fun to do, especially because, the players completely drive this game. You have to react to your opponents at all times, look for little opportunities to show up on the board, and try not to spread yourself too thin. So that's Way Out West. Have you ever played it? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know, what does this game remind you of? Because I don't think this game really reminds me of any other game. That's something I love about it, is it's very unique. It doesn't really feel like any other game, which surprises me for how old it is too. This is almost 25 years old, and it still absolutely holds up today. Once again, check the description below for any mistakes that I might have made, little rules clarifications and things like that. And in the description, there's also a digital tip jar. If you like this video, if you like my content, you can consider leaving a small donation to help the channel. It's not expected whatsoever, but if you like my content, you want to help keep the channel alive, that just motivates me to keep putting out content like this. I just do this in my free time. I'm passionate about finding these lesser known games and sharing them with all of you on a regular basis. So thank you to all of you who have donated to the channel. I really appreciate that. And the best way to help out, though, make sure you're subscribed right here on YouTube at undiscovered_games, and you can also follow me over on Instagram at undiscovered_games. So for now, I'm going to sign off. I'm your Undiscovered host saying thanks for watching. I'll be back with another great undiscovered game on the next episode. Stay tuned for that. We'll see you then.